different nuclei, but you should also notice that the axons are going to be bundled together in these structures that you see coming out from the spinal cord. And so what we have is, these are not actually referred to as nerves, okay? These are not nerves. Those are roots, okay? So those are roots. So this one right here is the, because I don't like the human terms, I always say dorsal root. But you can also say posterior root. And then the one down here is the ventral root, or anterior root. Okay? Now, what you should notice is that not only are the nuclei separated by location, so sensory nuclei are always more posterior, and motor nuclei or efferent nuclei are always more anterior. The roots are exactly the same. So the ventral root or anterior root will only ever be efferent. So it only carries efferent fibers. And then the dorsal will only carry afferent fibers. Now, if you notice that, and you know that those are afferent fibers, right? This is your spinal cord. This is here, thoracic spinal cord. So, what kind of sensations are coming back? What kind of senses? Touch. What else? Pain, right? Like temperature, those kinds of things. So, are those special senses?
No.
Why not?
They're not sight or smell.
Sure, but like, why is sight and smell a special sense? This wasn't in your book. I'm just asking you because it'll help you to understand things a little better. You know what makes a special sense special? Okay, take your finger, right? And don't touch your neighbor, touch yourself, okay? That sounds gross. So take your finger, right? And then touch your arm. And then touch your neck. And then touch your stomach or your abdomen, whatever. Now, were you able to feel the touch here on your arm? Were you able to feel it on your neck? What about on your abdomen? Yeah, right? Now, what I want you to do is I want you to see with your hand. Can you do that? Can you smell with your elbow? Can you taste with your knee? Why not? No. You're right, they're special, but somebody else was about to say it.
It's specialized.
You don't have... No? Somebody was going to say it. You don't have the necessary receptors and apparatus to do those things in all, right, the locations of your body. So those senses have receptors that are in a special location. That is what makes it a special sense. You can only see with your eyes, hear with your ears. Does that make sense? That's what makes it a special sense. So when we talk about these sensory signals coming back here, special or general? Those are general senses. What was the morphology of a general sensory neuron? What? Pseudo, unipolar. So remember, right? Is this the Microsoft one? I think that's the reason why it's all weird. Hold on a second. I don't like this. I think the stupid Microsoft one wrote on it. This card. Get rid of that. Okay, sorry. Okay, so now, right? The reason why I'm asking you this is we drew, right, a little neuron coming in like this, and then it synapsed right there, right?
Yeah.
Where's the cell body? This is the general sensory that's coming from peripheral into the central nervous system. And it's synapsing in the nucleus. So it synapses there, right there. And then the central nervous system neuron goes up towards the brain, like that. Right? So if I were going to draw the rest of this red neuron right here, right, wouldn't it have to be coming out like this? And then it's going to be coming, the signal is coming back from the body? Does that make sense? Yes? So where's the cell body for this neuron?
The dorsal root ganglia.
In the dorsal root ganglion. It's right here. So do you notice that there's like a bump right there on the dorsal root? That is a collection of cell bodies. Is it inside of the central nervous system? So is it a nucleus?
No.
So this is your dorsal root ganglion, which is a collection of cell bodies for your general sensory neurons. So what you should notice is, where did the synapse occur? Where's the synapse occurring? In the nucleus. Is it happening in the ganglion? Because it's not going to synapse on the cell body. The signal just completely bypasses the cell body and then ends up synapsing inside here. Now, if I have a motor neuron, right? So now it's coming from your brain and the signal goes down like this and it synapses like that, right there. Now, if I have a motor neuron, what's their shape? What's their morphology? Multipolar, right? All the dendrites sticking out like that. So in fact, the cell body is at one end just like this. Cell body right there. And then the axon comes out and it goes out towards your body just like that. So did the motor neuron have the synapse on or near its cell body? Yeah, on or near its cell body. It could be on the cell body, it could be on the dendrites. That is a very, very big difference between, right, huge difference between your motor neurons and your sensory neurons, okay, of the periphery, okay? So that's something you should absolutely understand. Pay attention to that. Now, right, what we're going to do is we're going to go past that, and you can still see that there is a dorsal root right here, and the dorsal root has its dorsal root ganglion, and you still have a ventral root, and, oops. You still have the ventral root right there. Now, they come together, and when the dorsal root and the ventral root come together, you're bringing sensory fibers and motor fibers together. So what you now have, for the very, very brief region right here, is you have what's referred to as a mixed spinal nerve, right there. Mixed spinal nerve. Mixed because it has motor and sensory. Now, that mixed spinal nerve is going to branch. And when it branches, it gives you one branch that comes all the way down like this. Okay? And this branch is moving towards the ventral side of your body, or the anterior side of your body, so it's called a ventral branch. The word ramus just means branch, remember that. So that's a ventral ramus. What kind of fibers are in a ventral ramus? Motor? Yes or no? Sensory? Yes or no?
Yes.
All four fiber types are inside there. Somatic efferent, visceral efferent, all four fiber types. Now, the other kind of branch that you have is this branch right here, and this one is going dorsally, so it's called a dorsal ramus or a dorsal branch. Now, what's the difference between their targets? So, ventral rami, what are they targeting? Not just limbs. They're going all the way down. They're doing all of this stuff. So where are they going? Look at this right here, right? Look at this right here. What are those? Transverse processes. Where, here, we'll start with the other one. Where's the dorsal ramus going? Dorsal to the transverse processes. So where's it going? To the epaxial region. Epaxial structures will only receive from dorsal rami. So what about ventral rami? Where are they going? Only going to hypaxial structures. All of your hypaxial structures are only going to receive from ventral rami. Any idea? Limbs? Which one are they? Because they have to be one or the other. Which one are they? Limbs. Hypaxial. So your limbs will only receive from ventral rami. Okay? stupid Microsoft. All right, so that's fine. All right, now, right? This is kind of what we were kind of looking at earlier. This is giving you like a whole bunch of different targets, but it's also giving you a separation between visceral and somatic. Okay, so the somatic stuff is in red, right? So the somatic stuff is in red, and what you should notice is, of course, like we had shown earlier, it's synapsing inside of the somatic sensory nucleus right there. You'll still see that the cell body is inside the dorsal root ganglion. Now, here's the thing. We have another structure that we didn't look at before, and that is this right here. So that was not included in the previous illustration. This is for the autonomic nervous system. This is in fact for your visceral, okay? Because when we're dealing with the ventral ramus and the dorsal ramus, those are for somatic things, epaxial and hypaxial. This right here is for the visceral, right, sensory, and the visceral motor. So this is only for your organs. Okay, that's only for your organs. So what you should notice is, when we're dealing with the sensory signal for somatic sensory, remember it's the red, right? Do you see any red? Whoa, that was not what I wanted. Do you see any red fibers coming down into here? No, because somatic is not for your guts. So, somatic is only going where? That's dorsal ramus, so where's it going?
Epaxial muscles.
Epaxial. Oh, actually, here, let me reword that. Coming from, I was saying going to, coming from epaxial. So, the signal is coming from your epaxial region, or it's coming from, right, your hypaxial body wall, and remember, limbs are hypaxial, so it could be coming from your limbs. So that sensation of touch you were feeling earlier, right, that is going to be coming from your limb through a ventral ramus, and then it goes into the mixed spinal nerve here, and then because it's sensory, it has to travel through your dorsal root in order to get to your somatic sensory nucleus, okay? So that's the somatic stuff. If we're dealing with the visceral stuff, then the visceral is going to be very, very different. Now, the big difference is what we were talking about right here. That's where the big difference is. Because you still have to have some visceral sensory on your epaxial. You still have to have visceral sensory on your hypaxial in order to understand what's going on with your organs and viscera that are in those regions. So you can still have, right, visceral sensory coming in from epaxial, visceral sensory coming in from hypaxial, but what's added, the additional, is you can have from your organs, right, telling you that your stomach has been stretched out, or that your stomach is not stretched out and it's time for you to eat something. Those signals are coming back from your organs, and they're going to travel through, what is this big nodule that you see right there? That's a ganglion. So it travels through this ganglion, right? And when it travels through the ganglion, then what it's going to do is it's going to go past what's referred to as a communicating ramus, because all those are doing is communicating with the mixed spinal nerve that we see right here. So it goes through the communicating ramus, reaches the mixed spinal nerve, and now it goes into the dorsal root, and then goes all the way down to the visceral sensory nucleus. Okay? So this is how you receive information from your organs, okay? Like your heart, your stomach, your liver, things like that, okay? Now, this ganglion that we see right here, we will come back to that concept. We'll come back to that idea right there, okay? But before we can come back to it, we have to talk about lower motor and upper motor neurons, right? There is a very brief thing in your book about this in a different chapter, so this is the part where I have to tell you certain things about them, okay? So, with upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons, upper motor neurons are in the central nervous system. And what they're going to do is bring the signal down from your brain through your spinal cord. So they're only inside of your central nervous system, and they are then going to synapse on onto the lower motor neurons. So, right, your brain, that's the top, that's where everything starts, that's why they're upper motor neurons. Now, for the signal to actually get out from your spinal cord and then go to the target structures like your muscles, you need lower motor neurons. So lower motor neurons, like we saw earlier, have their cell bodies inside of the CNS, because the cell bodies are located inside of a motor nucleus, inside of one of the gray horns, right? Now, what they're going to do is come out and extend into the peripheral nervous system. Now, in this, I'm saying we're going to focus on the spinal cord, because technically your brainstem has lower motor neurons coming out also. Those are your cranial nerves, which we'll talk about later, okay? But for today, we're focusing on the spinal cord. So those neurons, the lower motor neurons, are emerging through the ventral root and then going out to epaxial and hypaxial region. So those are lower motor neurons. So what we're now going to see is what they look like. So remember what we were saying is, for the central nervous system, you're going to have an upper motor neuron, and the upper motor neuron is coming from your brain, and it's going to come down. And then what it's going to do is it's actually going to synapse, right? And when it synapses, it's going to synapse onto a cell body which is inside of one of your motor nuclei, right? So somatic efferent or visceral efferent nucleus, one of those two. Now, that cell body in that nucleus belongs to a lower motor neuron, okay? So what you have is, for the lower motor neurons, the somatic, remember, the structure down here, the sympathetic ganglion, these communicating rami that we're seeing right there, they have nothing to do with somatic stuff. So the somatic lower motor neuron signal actually comes out, goes through your ventral root, goes to your mixed spinal nerve, and then it can go out through a dorsal ramus to your epaxial, or a ventral ramus to your hypaxial. And that's it. That's pretty much it. That's the somatic efferent, lower motor neuron. Now, if we're dealing with the visceral, then the visceral, you're going to come out from the lateral gray horn, you go into the ventral root, you travel to the mixed spinal nerve, and now this is where things are going to be weird. They're going to be very, very weird. It doesn't immediately branch and go dorsal and ventral. So what's going to happen is, it's actually going to come down through the communicating ramus. So it reaches the mixed spinal nerve, and then it goes down through the communicating ramus, and it reaches the ganglion. Now, here's the funny thing, okay? We're going to talk about ANS later. This is specifically for sympathetics. Parasympathetics are not going to work the same way. And because this is specifically for sympathetics, this is a sympathetic ganglion, okay? Now, in this particular example, right, what we're going to have is it now synapses inside of this ganglion right there, okay? Now, this is an important concept. Is remember we were talking about the way that we illustrate, neurons? So we have a cell body like this, and then it comes down like this, and this is a motor neuron. This is a multipolar motor neuron. And then, when we reach the next neuron, where does the synapse occur? On or near the cell body. And then you go to the postsynaptic neuron. So for motor neurons, right, the synapses for motor neurons should always be located where? On or near what? Which cell body? Here, you only have two cell bodies, right? You have this cell body. Which one is this?
Postsynaptic.
Postsynaptic. And you have this one. So where is the synapse occurring? On or near the postsynaptic cell body. Now, what is this thing right here? That's a ganglion. What's a ganglion? A collection of cell bodies of, in particular, motor neurons right here. So what do you think is happening at that ganglion? Synapse. That's exactly what's happening. So what we now see, right, is you synapse onto a cell body inside of the sympathetic ganglion, and then, this is the weirdest thing, then it comes back up through the other communicating ramus to your mixed spinal nerve, where now it can go through the dorsal ramus to go to your epaxial, or it can go through your ventral ramus to go to your hypaxial. That's like, it's just the way that sympathetics are arranged. So, here's something that you should pay attention to. When we are dealing with, motor signals, right, and we're leaving the central nervous system, how many neurons does it take to get to a somatic target? Leaving the CNS and getting to your target structure, how many neurons? What? How many did we draw? The red, look at the red. One neuron, one lower motor neuron, leaving your central nervous system and then going to your target structure. How many does it take for a visceral? Two. Okay, and we'll come back to this idea. Visceral efferent is always a two motor neuron system. And I'm not even talking about the central nervous system part. It's just the peripheral nervous system part. Okay? So, we will come back to this other weird variation that we're seeing right there. Right? We'll come back to that. That's for ANS stuff. Alright, so now, right, this is going to be an important concept right here, is we're going to work with these things together, and you're going to get what are called reflexes. So motor and sensory and motor are working together to give you reflexes. Now, in order to have a reflex, what you are experiencing is some type of sensory stimulus, and then without you consciously making a decision or a contribution, you're having a motor reaction, a motor event in response to that. Okay? Now, these are protective mechanisms. Okay? So reflexes are protective mechanisms. As weird as this sounds, right? The stretch reflex here, where like a doctor goes like this and then your leg kicks out like that, that's a protective mechanism. Okay? And the reason why it's a protective mechanism is when you tap on this tendon right here, the patellar tendon, what it's doing is it's actually stretching the tendon, okay? And the response to like the stretching, like the unknown stretching, is that your muscle will contract and it'll tighten up, okay? And when that happens, then your leg kicks out like that. This is protective because do you want, without your conscious, input into it, do you want your muscles and your tendons to just be stretched out without you having any control over it? Right? Like if you're kind of like moving along, right? And don't ask me why, right? This would happen. You're moving along, your hand reaches and catches on something, you're still moving, and it just stretches. What would happen to your muscle if you didn't resist that? Yeah, it would tear. That's why this is protective, okay? So when you feel the stretch, you contract, you tighten up. That's a protective mechanism. Now, you don't have to think about it. So what happens is, you're going to get a signal that, right, that a stretch has occurred right here. Now, once that stretch has occurred, what it's going to do is it's actually going to stimulate receptors inside of your muscle belly. And what that does is it sends the signal from your muscle belly through your sensory fibers into your spinal cord. Now, this is the thing. It does not synapse in a sensory nucleus here, okay? What it's going to do is it's actually going to synapse in your somatic motor nucleus. Synapses in the somatic motor nucleus, and so what happens is, without you thinking about it, you are going to stimulate the motor nerve, and then when that motor nerve is stimulated, it's going to send the signal out to your muscles, and it's going to cause that muscle to now contract, and then your leg kicks out like that. That is a reflex, okay? How many synapses did this undergo? One. So what is this called? Monosynaptic. You can also call it a simple reflex. Monosynaptic or a simple reflex, okay? Now, if we are dealing with, right, stretch reflexes. This table, you should memorize this table, okay? Because I'm going to ask you stuff about, right, the stretch reflexes and what's happening with the stretch reflexes. Because, right, when you are, I'm going to go backwards for a second. When you're dealing with stretch reflexes, okay, are we consciously making this decision? No. So, this is an important question. Are we using upper motor neurons? Nope, not at all. This is only sensory and lower motor neurons. Those are the only things involved in this. Now, the fact that you then know that your leg kicked out is because, well, around this, you also have sensory neurons which will travel up to your brain and tell your brain, hey, your leg kicked out. Did you know that? And then you'll go, oh yeah, actually I guess I did kick my leg out. But you did not choose to kick your leg out like that, okay? So this is only lower motor neurons. So whenever we're dealing with reflexes, you should understand that those reflexes are tied to very specific nerves, right? So remember the spinal nerves coming out? If you're dealing with a particular muscle, right, then you should know which spinal nerves are innervating which particular muscles that will experience these like reflex reactions to stretching. And you can do it with every single one of those. You can do it with your bicep. You have to have it relaxed. You usually rest it on something, and you tap the bicipital tendon, and it'll happen. You can actually make this happen. Same thing, brachioradialis. You can do that. You usually cannot do it to yourself, right? So it has to be relaxed and supported, and you do that, and then it'll do this, right? You can do it with your triceps also, right? The one that we're all very familiar with is this one, the patellar tendon, and you can do it with the calcaneal tendon. You tap on your Achilles tendon, and your foot will do that, okay? These are stretch reflexes that you can like test for. Why would you want to test for these? Why is a doctor testing for these kinds of things? Why do they do that? Because they want to know if you have a nerve deficit. Now, okay, here's the thing. We will come back to that concept. But in order to make more sense of it, you have to memorize these things. You've got to know which nerves go to which muscles for stretch reflexes. Now, there are some more complicated reflexes. So with these ones, the more complicated ones, right, there are two basic ones, the withdrawal and then what's called crossed extensor. So with the withdrawal reflex, right, same thing is you have some sort of painful stimulus, so it's a sensory signal, travels along. Now this one's not stretch, this is a pain. It travels along the sensory neuron, goes back through your dorsal root. Now, this is where we're actually going to involve another neuron. It's called an interneuron. This interneuron receives the signal, and then the interneuron actually spreads out and sends the signal to multiple locations. One of the locations, well, it actually goes up to your brain, and it tells your brain what's going on. The other, well, another one of the signals actually goes to the motor neuron that goes to your flexor. And the reason why is because when you reach out and you touch something hot, what do you want to then do? You want to pull away from it, and what's the kind of muscles that will allow you to pull away? Flexors, right? So your flexors retract like this. Flexors retract, and you go like this. Now, if at the same time you were stimulating and exciting your flexors, you were also exciting your extensor muscles, what would happen? Well, it's not nothing. What would happen? Here, watch, I'll show you nothing. That's nothing. This is what would happen if you stimulated flexors and extensors at the same time. So what's happening? You're actually stuck. Your limb is stuck in position because if you can't flex and you can't extend, it's going to be stuck in position. Does that make sense? So if you want to flex your arm away, what do you have to do to your extensors?
Relax.
You got to relax them. You have to inhibit them. So that is also what the interneuron is doing, is it's also sending an inhibitory signal to your extensors. This is a much more complex reflex, and it requires more synapses and more neurons. So what is it called? What? More synapses. polysynaptic. Or you can call it a complex, right? Complex or polysynaptic. All right, so we will do more of this tomorrow. We'll finish, and then